Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this very special series of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. I'm your host, Shanti Ryle, Director of Content at Crexi, and this is the Women of Influence series, delivering next-level insights and expertise live from GlobeSt's Women of Influence conference. And today, we are thrilled to sit down with Carmen Perkins. A little bit about our guest. Carmen Perkins, president of Civitas, brings 25 plus years of business experience with a background in investment banking, real estate finance, and investment management. She served as executive vice president of Durham Capital, originating and closing over $4 billion in debt financing. Carmen also worked at Goldman Sachs and Price Waterhouse in M&A and international tax roles. She holds an MBA in finance from Columbia University, a BA in economics from the University of Virginia, and serves on several educational and community impact organization boards. Carmen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Shanti. Great to be with you today.
And happy to have you.
Fantastic to be back at Women of Influence.
I know. I think it's going to be a really fun conference. This is my first year here, but I've heard such amazing things about the networking, the people. What are you most excited about this year?
Well, I'm always excited just to be in this environment because I think the setting of being up in the mountains with the fresh air, and it's just so relaxing. I think it just allows everyone to just to make the most of the relationships and be at their most, I think, impactful and personal self. So we can.
Everyone feels comfortable.
It's so comfortable and it's so much fun. There are a lot of activities, and it's nice to be around such an amazing group of women that I can learn from.
I'm so excited too. I think it's going to be so much fun. So getting into our interview today, I know I covered a brief bit about your background, but I'd love to hear more, about where you're from, how you got your start in commercial real estate, what drew you to it, just a little bit, of your story in your own words.
Yeah, sure. So I am from the Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. I live in D.C. now, but I actually grew up around commercial real estate, which I think might be somewhat of a rarity, but going back a couple of generations, my grandmother was in the business. She worked at the Recorder of Deeds office in D.C. and was an investor and owner of some multifamily and single-family properties. My mom was a banker. She worked and did bond deals for the Virginia Housing Development Authority. So I kind of grew up in the sauce and couldn't escape it. I later married a veteran commercial office broker. So it was with me the whole time. But as far as my professional background, it very much came as a second career for me. I started off in investment banking, working for about 20 years at Goldman Sachs and Durham Capital. And after doing some M&A and financing deals for commercial real estate firms, I just could not ignore the draw of the industry. I had to jump in, and so I decided to make the plunge. I joined the family business. My husband had founded Civitas about 8 years prior, and it has been off to the races ever since.
Amazing. Yes. That's so funny that it's 3 generations of being in it, learning. I bet that was such an amazing access you had to kind of see firsthand, like the nuts and bolts of what the industry looked like. And now being in business with your husband, it sounds like.
Yes, I think it was really interesting also just to observe the role and the power of women in the business and carve out areas where, we're very underrepresented in some areas, but there's also great opportunity for those who have a strong interest and are passionate about it.
Yeah, which is a lot of what the conference is about today, too. I think there's a big focus on empowering younger professionals, especially, and helping them realize, wow, there's so much opportunity in this business. Here's what you can tap into. Here's what we can teach you from people who've been in it for years like yourself. So that's really, really awesome. I'm curious, just in the 20 years of investment banking you said, right? Did I overestimate? I
yes, that's about right.
Okay. Do you have any, and then commercial real estate beyond that, do you have any achievements or projects you've worked on that you're most proud of, or maybe that taught you some of the most important lessons that you've learned in your career thus far? Can you share some with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of projects, I am very proud of a redevelopment project that that Civitas Commercial Real Estate was involved in Washington, D.C. So this was a disposition of about a 5-city block parcel from a historical black church in D.C. To a minority developer. It's going to be in the future a large commercial mixed-use development that has an affordable housing component, as well as linkage to a newly developed city park. It's being developed on also some decommissioned CSX rail lines, and so there is a huge environmental component to this project. So it really hits on all of the motivating factors for me of being environmentally sensitive, of driving social impact within a community that needs it, and also helping to create more financial sustainability around a cultural institution that's important to DC.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You check all the boxes with that one. That's amazing.
And fun.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And then I'm curious, you touched on a couple of interesting things, just getting into development in urban areas, I guess kind of like getting in the weeds of mixed use and how you have to keep all these different like business focuses in line when you're dealing with that stuff, dealing with local regulations as well. I'm curious, what are some challenges that you've encountered during the course of your career that, maybe set you up for success and you didn't realize it later on, or like led to opportunities that you maybe wouldn't have had otherwise by facing them? Can you share a little bit about those? It's more career pathy, but
Okay.
I'm curious, if you have any stories that like stick out.
Yeah,
in your
sure.
head.
I think from a career path standpoint, one of the stories is making the leap from a large firm to a smaller boutique or family-owned firm, which I think is particularly relevant in commercial real estate. There's a lot of safety, amazing training and relationships at some of the big firms, but I think you can find perhaps more leadership opportunity, more personal reward, more financial reward, and greater exposure by working for a smaller firm, and that's been really key for me. And so I think that's something that I would encourage younger people to consider when they are really at pivot points in their career. Maybe not in the first year or two, but as they kind of take a long-term look at opportunities down the road.
Yeah, you got to figure out kind of what you're interested in first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I'm curious, at Civitas, do you have any kind of like mentorship programs or maybe ways that you set up people on your team for success or to, go forward on their career path? I'm curious kind of what that looks like where you guys are at.
Well, because we're fairly small, we have the luxury of being able to do that very much one-on-one. And
Sure.
so it's built over years of personal relationships and personal development. But we also find a lot of value in partnering with organizations like Women of Influence and also with Crew in particular to give us, really structured mentoring programs that I think are great for some of our younger team members to participate in. So we've got, one of our VPs is currently going through Crew's leadership development program, which has been outstanding.
Sure.
And but we also think it's very much hand-to-hand combat, making sure that we're arming people
Sure.
with, the skills that they need to succeed.
Yeah, I'm curious, since this is the Women of Influence conference, what advice do you have for either young women or maybe your peers working in the space today? I think, and I've talked to Wendy Mann on this podcast a couple of years ago and had a really great conversation about, how we get more women into this, huge field of opportunity. But a lot of people don't know it's an option for them. A lot of people have there's no one in their lives to see, the legacy of women in your life to show them, oh, it's absolutely possible to have a great career in this industry if you're interested. So what advice would you give to these women based on your experience?
So a couple points. I think, first of all, bite off more than you think that you can chew. I think if you're a woman interested in commercial real estate by nature, you are ambitious and you're driven and you're capable and you're confident, I would say whenever you are given any opportunity, take risks early on in your career. Go for opportunities that you think are going to cause you to get ahead of your skis and to be in a mode of learning, but also to stretch yourself because you can do it. You're capable of it. And the men do it all the time. So put yourself out there, especially early in your career. And I think that reaps a lot of rewards later on. And I also have some advice that I think is a bit contrarian to...
we love contrarian on this podcast. Please lay it on us.
Yeah. So we just hear so much, not just internally at our firm, but also as we advise other larger clients about work-life strategy and workplace strategy. And there's a lot of concern about balance and about hybrid work. I think that as a young woman in this industry, throw it out. I think that you've got to dive in. I think that you've got to be 100% committed to your career, especially early on. You've got to work your ass off. You've got to be in the office. I think you've got to be around people who have the ability to mentor you and to give you opportunities. And I'm not sure how many people, are pursuing that path right now. And I think it will truly set yourself apart if you decide that you're going to err on the side of, over-investing in your own personal development and your presence in the industry.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think to younger women, especially who, maybe aren't married yet, they don't have children yet, they don't have maybe like more a sense of, other stuff in life. Like they're in the season of their career where they're ready to go all in and put those reps and those hours in. I saw this quote that was something along the lines of, we have no qualms about seeing athletes work their butts off to get to the level of success they are. But when it comes to the workplace, there's a little bit of a different dynamic and people are like, oh, no, you should like only 8 hours. I think for some people that makes sense. But if you are hungry and you have that fire in your belly, it totally makes sense to use the time you have, especially early on in your career, to just go after it. Yeah, totally makes sense.
I think a caveat to that is that it must be in an area that you feel super passionate about, or else you will burn out.
Yes.
So I think being curious and making sure that you do that personal introspection first is the right exercise.
I love it. Oh, I love it. Great words of wisdom. So this is Women of Influence, but it's also a commercial real estate conference. So I want to get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of commercial real estate specifically with you. So kind of the bird's eye overview, there's a lot of shifting things happening in our economy today, but what is your perception of the greater industry today as far as commercial real estate goes? What are some key trends that stand out to you? What are maybe things that aren't as scary as like journals would make them seem? What is your perspective on the market today?
So at Civitas, we are very concerned with civic-oriented projects. So these would be real estate projects that either have a municipal or civic anchor, that have a purpose around social impact, or that have important cultural institutions involved in those projects, such as colleges and universities and other kind of culturally essential entities. We see those as being very relevant in terms of the comeback of urban office environments, where we traditionally have spent about 75% of our time. We have a buzzword right now, at least in our market in Washington, D.C., of pursuing conversions, and right now it's called office to anything. When you've got,
I mean, it's good, but it's like, oh, poor office.
It is what it
is. It is what it is, yeah.
And it's a problem that all of us need to chip in and find solutions in order to allow this industry to kind of move beyond the current trough that it's in. We've seen valuations plunging and really some, functionally obsolete projects that are going to require envisioning a new future. And so as we look to the next 5 or 10 years, we see civic institutions, and in particular cultural institutions, as being vital anchors in some of those conversions in some of those new projects. We think that making sure that there is an emotional connection and sense of place is going to be a tremendous factor in driving valuations in the future, particularly in urban growth markets.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's just bringing more and more people back. Like, people aren't going to leave cities. I think there was a little bit of a great migration during COVID, but people love cities. There's a lot of opportunity there. I think especially for a lot of younger people, like really hungry to enter the workforce. And, I can't remember the numbers, but there was an upward trajectory of younger generations wanting to be in more entrepreneurial work in general, just to have more ownership of their income and stability in their life, and cities is where it's happening. So
yes, I think at the end of the day, we all need people and we all need to feel connected. And the built environment is how we do that. That's how we make those connections. But we also need the institutions to take an anchor lead in making those projects pencil.
Yes, that's a great point. So you mentioned you're working on this really fabulous mixed-use development project. And I'm sure there was a lot of figuring out stuff around local regulations and, trying to get certain codes kosher and approvals put through. I'm curious, just kind of based on the landscape today, it's also an election year, so that always impacts what legislation does or does not come through.
And changes moment to moment now.
Yes, it really does. This is recording in July, so we'll see what's new once this airs too.
That's right.
But I'm curious, kind of based on your purview in DC, what roadblocks do you see that maybe could be massaged out with the right kind of legislation to building more of those opportunities, those cultural centers, those community watering holes, if you will? And then also what makes DC in particular maybe a good spot for those opportunities based on what the marketplace looks like?
I think the environmental factor is going to be a huge factor with respect to anticipating policy changes and what the impact is going to be on commercial real estate valuations. About a year ago, our firm did some research on the impact of ESG improvements on building valuations and rental rates across DC, and we found that they were highly correlated. I'm not sure how that's going to look like given the political environment going forward, and if we see some pullback on some of the really groundbreaking environmental regulations that have been leading in DC. This was certainly a factor in terms of determining the overall project price and making sure that we were in compliance with what we believe to be very important environmental restrictions. But we could see a lot of that fall away very quickly if we've got a change in political climate.
Sure. Yeah, you got to see where the 8 ball is going.
And we also have companies that, are taking a look at their overall office footprint, and they're thinking about, okay, what's my total occupancy cost, and how much am I really willing to invest in ESG and in DEI and all of these kind of political hot button issues in general. And so I think a lot of those issues are still going to be up in the air for a while until we see some definitive policy changes post-election.
Sure. Absolutely. And, I hesitate to ask the crystal ball question because there's so much up in the air, but I think outside of those larger, election-based topics, what do you see from a commercial real estate trends perspective still happening either the second half of this year going into 2025? This could be based on macroeconomic factors, like if interest rates do go down, hopefully faster than slower. Like what do you see long-term trend-wise in the market today?
One that we've been paying a little bit of attention to is factors that are impacting universities, which is a sector of focus for Civitas, and in particular student housing. And we have been seeing a lot of capital inflows to student housing, financing development, really on the sidelines in this interest rate environment. And we believe that it's an industry that has significant upside given the demand drivers and also the lack of consolidation within the sector. And we think that, given the current projections on interest rate cuts, that there's an opportunity for significant capital inflows into student housing. And we see a fair amount of interest in the sector from private equity firms that are seeking to gain a foothold in the industry and consolidate, which is currently very fragmented.
Yeah, investing in the future.
That's right.
But yeah, looking at time, I don't want to keep you. We've got a lot to get to in this conference. So really appreciate you sitting down with us, sharing your insights. If people wanted to get a hold of you, learn more about what Civitas does, learn more about you, maybe work with you guys, what's the best way to get in contact?
So you can find us at civitasre.com, and you can always reach out to me at cperkins@civitasre.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Love it. So great sitting with you, Carmen. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Looking forward to a great conference.
Yes. And thank you, everybody who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode of Women of Influence, please do not miss the next one. You can visit www.crexi.com/podcast for our full collection of episodes, or go to our YouTube channel to see video recordings of everything on our channel. Take care and be sure to tune in next time.